Let's listen now to Conservative leader Aaron O'Toole.
In world affairs. Later today, Michael Chong, the Conservative Shadow Minister for Foreign Affairs, will be introducing a motion demanding clear actions of the Liberal government. It will ask for a decision to finally be made on Huawei's participation in our 5G system. And it will call upon the government to develop a comprehensive plan aimed at protecting Canada from the growing influence of Chinese influence operations. The democratic world must acknowledge that the approach to China over the last 2 decades has not worked. In fact, the situation has only gotten worse in recent years. The democratic
world must realize that its collaboration approach with China hasn't worked. Instead of normalizing the system, this government is now harder, and it is now threatening us.
Believed that engagement would lead to democracy. We falsely believed that ignoring the sharp edges of communism would, over time, smooth them out by putting trade ahead of our values. Canada was so committed to this belief that we happily joined our allies in accepting China into the World Trade Organization, a decision that we now know had catastrophic impacts on Canadian workers. China has violated numerous conditions under which it was admitted to the World Trade Organization. That isn't surprising. Everything carried out by the Chinese Communist Party is deliberate and planned, from their lobbying campaign of Western politicians to secure that WTO admission, to their efforts at disrupting our industries by dumping state-subsidized cheap commodities and ignoring intellectual property laws. The rise of Huawei was itself facilitated by years of industrial espionage conducted by China against Nortel. When we talk about the jobs that we've outsourced to China, we're not just talking about textile manufacturing. It is advanced manufacturing, technology, and jobs we believe are the jobs of the future. Intellectual property theft, counterfeiting, and digital piracy are not exceptions to our dealings with China. They are the reality. And it's high time our government and many corporate leaders realize that. We may have lost Nortel to Huawei. We can't undo that, but we can and must learn from it. Because if we don't, we have to accept that another company will be next. Nous étions tous fiers de Nortel.
We're all proud of our Nortel, a Canadian success story, but we have done nothing to protect it against the cyber spying from China. If Huawei is a world giant today, it's due to the fact that they spied and stolen Nortel technology, and Canada preferred to shut its eyes in order not to offend China. But the time to close our eyes is over. It's time for us to stand up and denounce and counter any cyber spying from China.
Industry and trade. This is a matter of human rights, dignity, and freedom. For too long, our country has watched the long arm of Beijing establish itself on our soil. We tolerated Confucius Institutes, basically propaganda outlets, under the belief it would be great for our kids to learn Mandarin through programs financed by the Chinese Communist Party. Professors tolerated a dilution of their curriculum on human rights after being repeatedly told that their teachings shouldn't offend students from mainland China. And we stood by as pro-Beijing media outlets disseminated anti-Western narratives and propaganda in our communities. In recent years, however, this has taken an altogether darker turn. Canadians of Chinese origin have been threatened by foreign agents in our country. Anti-Hong Kong protests were organized in Canada to bully democracy advocates. Uyghur students in our universities have been deplatformed and menaced in coordinated actions, often led by Chinese consulates across our country. And the very values we hold dear, like openness, justice, and tolerance, have been weaponized against us. It is now fashionable in some quarters to say that standing up for human rights is anti-Chinese racism, and that denouncing Chinese state bullying is paternalistic. When a dictatorship starts having so much influence to the point that protecting Canadian citizens on Canadian soil is now an open question for debate, you know we have a problem. La Chine menace maintenant des citoyens canadiens sur le
Canadian citizen
territoire
on the Canadian territory. The first duty of the Canadian government is to protect its citizens. But the Liberal government is so fascinated by China that it refuses to protect our interests. I do not accept this.
Those most hurt by the weaponization of our values against us are the brave Canadians of Chinese origin who have heard of friends disappear in China, who have witnessed democracy crushed in Hong Kong. And ultimately, it is the Chinese people themselves, many of whom look to our democracy, rights, and liberties with admiration. I cannot say this enough. The conflict we currently have is with the Chinese Communist Party, not the Chinese people. And we must also recognize that the Chinese state speaks for the party, not for its people. Facing a challenge as big as this will require a national effort, from the highest levels of government to the individual choices of consumers. We must speak openly about the stakes at hand. Chinese web of influence not only undermines our government's response, it shakes our citizens' trust. While the Trudeau government is ignoring the problem, Canadians are worried we aren't doing enough to stand up to Chinese aggression. But now is the time to act. This is what our motion intends to do. First, we call upon the government to finally grow a spine and make a decision on Huawei's involvement in Canada's critical 5G network within 30 days of the adoption of this motion. Second, we ask that the government develop a robust plan, as Australia has done, to combat China's growing foreign influence operations here in Canada and its increasing intimidation of Canadians. A draft plan, which the government had years to prepare, should be tabled within 30 days of the adoption of this motion. Canada likes to be a leader, but we can only conclude that we are literally the last of the Five Eyes allies when it comes to dealing with Huawei. All countries but us have taken the decision to ban Huawei from their critical 5G infrastructure. Are the United Kingdom, the United States, Australia, and New Zealand so misguided that we would not follow their advice? As for foreign interference, our Australian friends, with far more risks in bilateral trade, have tackled the threat to their institutions and their democracy head first. Others are acting while we are dithering. We must rethink our approach. On matters of such high importance, Conservatives are willing to partner with the government to help improve our response. Canadians look to us to protect their interests, their well-being, and our sovereignty. This is something this government can do by voting with us on this motion and actioning these recommendations. We urge Liberal MPs who care about these issues, who want to fight for our democracy, to vote with us on this important matter. If the Liberals are truly committed to protecting Canadians' privacy, as they claim with their upcoming privacy law, they should support this motion. It's time that we stand as one. It's time that we stand for Canada. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
We'll now take questions, starting with questions on the phone. Quick reminder, one question, one follow-up. Nous allons maintenant passer aux questions, commençant par les questions au téléphone. Un petit rappel, une question suivie. Today we'll have 3 questions on the phone with follow-up and 3 questions in the room with follow-up. Operator, do we have a first question?
Thank you. Merci. Please press star 1 for questions. S'il vous plaît, faites étoile 1 pour les questions. Première question, Hélène Buzetti, Le Devoir. À vous.
Oui, bonjour, Monsieur O'Toole. J'aimerais vous poser une question.
I'd like to ask you a question regarding the Maverick Party. They had the Wexit announced, led by a former colleague of yours, Cahill. How do you welcome this new player on the federal scene that will probably step on your toes somewhere? I understand the frustration with the Trudeau government in Western Canada. Of course, I spoke with many Canadians with those issues, particularly the ideological approach of the Trudeau government. But the Conservatives and Canadians must work together. in the next election. And I will examine the opportunity to work on the important issues in Western Canada with Mr. Hill's movement. And he voted for me as a leader of the Conservative Party. It's important for all Canadians to work together in the next election. We need a serious government, and we need to unite our country. Are you fearing some kind of division of the vote in Western Canada like the Reform Party did in 1993, which allowed the Liberals back then to stay in power for 3 consecutive majority governments? As I said, it's important for every voice in the country to speak together against the Trudeau government. And I spoke in the summer with Mr. Hill over the summer, and we need to learn the lessons when the right was fractured between the progressives, the conservatives, and the reform. And it's important for all conservatives to work together.
Opérateur, prochaine question.
Thank you. Merci. Next question, Brian Mullen, Global News, line open.
Mr. O'Toole, are you concerned about the potential economic consequences of your motion if and when China retaliates?
No, we have seen in the past that the threat of intimidation, the threat of trade action by the communist state in Beijing led countries to accede to their wishes and to look the other way on values, on human rights. It's why I think Canada should work very closely with our Five Eyes allies, with Australia, with the United Kingdom, with the United States, with New Zealand, so that it's difficult for China to use their immense economic size to intimidate smaller economies like Canada. As I've said often, we may be a smaller economy in comparison with China, but we are a giant when it comes to the rights we hold dear, human rights, the rule of law, and the security of our citizens.
So if China blocks agriculture products, there obviously will be a price to pay. Do you feel farmers should be compensated if that happens?
I spoke in my remarks, Brian, that we need to look for new markets, and consumers will recognize that the certainty of our own supply lines, our self-sufficiency, the fact that our values are not for sale with respect to dealing with China, means there may be some higher costs. There may be a dramatic need for us to open new markets in the Indo-Pacific, restore relations with India that have been fractured under Mr. Trudeau, open up new opportunities as we did in government with South Korea, with Japan. So we have to play that balance, but I think the last 20 years shows a new, serious approach is needed with respect to China, and Mr. Trudeau is clearly incapable of providing that leadership.
Opérateur, prochaine question.
Thank you. Merci. Prochaine question, Boris Proulx, Le Devoir, à vous.
Bonjour, est-ce que vous m'entendez?
Can you hear me? Yes?
Oui.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oui, d'accord.
All right, so,
Bonjour, Monsieur O'Toole.
Mr. O'Toole, I'd like to know, you spoke about Nortel as an example of Chinese spying, but all this happened under former governments, including conservative governments. Don't you think the conservative governments have responsibilities with the current situation with China? We need to have a new approach with China. I said this, and 20 years ago we had an approach hoping for the future that the Chinese government would be different, and it hasn't worked. And we need to have a new approach on the human rights, on international trade, and on public safety. And that's why we must have a common approach with our Five Eyes allies regarding YY specifically, and also actions made by China on our territory. You've also said that we are tolerating the Confucius Institute and the teaching of Mandarin, should we prohibit the teaching of Mandarin, prohibit the Confucius Institute? We need to speak with provinces on this issue because, as you know, education is provincial authority. But for me, it's inappropriate for Chinese money to have an impact on education of Canadians. And we will speak like a government with our partners, the provinces, on this issue.
Nous allons maintenant prendre des questions de la salle. We'll now take question number 1. Mia?
Good morning, Mia Rabson from the Canadian Press. I'm curious if you have any concerns about what might happen to the fate of the two Michaels that are still in China in detention by this motion. Are you concerned that this will have any impact on China's decision related to them?
I think about the two Michaels every day, and I think many Canadians do. We're now at about 706 days or so of the illegal incarceration of Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor. Clearly, the Trudeau government has made no progress. In fact, they originally called the capturing of the two Michaels to be regular consular cases. We said at the time that was not the situation. So we have to show that we will work with our allies in a concerted way to provide a counterbalance to the bad actions of China with respect to Hong Kong, the Uyghur minority Muslim population, its approach to global trade and security. And I think personally, after a weak response by Mr. Trudeau in many years has not led to any progress on the case of the two Michaels, a more principled, a stronger approach may make progress.
I'm also curious why you're pushing this now when there's a new president in a few months in the United States who may have changes in how they're dealing with China or how they're dealing with the Huawei case and the Meng Wanzhou case in general. Why would you not wait to see what happens there before pushing on this motion?
Well, because our U.S. partners, which we have to rebuild that relationship, it has atrophied terribly under Mr. Trudeau, beginning with the Obama administration. The U.S. has been asking its Five Eyes allies for 5 years now to not have Huawei in the critical 5G infrastructure, particularly because our countries share intelligence and Canada's economy is integrated with the United States. So this move, and why I've asked the government to actually vote with us, is going to help reestablish relations with the United States. The U.S. Democratic lawmakers have questioned some of the foreign takeovers of Canadian companies approved by Justin Trudeau. So we have to show we can be a serious and reliable trade and security partner with the U.S.
Go ahead.
I'm Mr. O'Toole, David Thurton, CBC News.
Hi, David.
The ethics commissioner was alerted 2 years ago that Liberal MP Yasmin Ratanzi was hiring her sister, employing her sister in office. What goes through your mind when you hear that?
I was shocked by the situation with Miss Ratanzi. Certainly the reports of her sister hiding in the office because people knew she hired her sister. I was also concerned about some offensive comments she made that is coming out by staff now. I'd ask the Prime Minister, the Prime Minister's office, and the Liberal whips to reveal to Canadians, including the Ethics Commissioner, how much they knew about some of this conduct, including the intimidation, the non-servicing of people from several ethnic backgrounds in Toronto. I thought that was atrocious. I would like the Liberal government to come forward with all the information they knew on Ms. Ratanzi and on what timeline.
What about the Ethics Commissioner? Does your head not shake when you hear that they have the opportunity to investigate this and do something about it?
Well, there's been a few ethics commissioners in the last 2 to 3 years, as you know, David, and Mr. Trudeau himself has been keeping them so busy. I think they're overtasked, perhaps. I think the ethics commissioner should reveal on what timeline the conduct of Ms. Ratanzi was being looked at. I think the transparency that is associated with the ethics commissioner requires that level of disclosure. I also, again, call on the Liberal whip, the Prime Minister's office. It's shocking that with so many reports coming out from staff members that work for her now, that were saying she would not service to the same high level constituents depending on their background. That's repugnant to me. And so the Liberals should reveal, have these complaints been out there for a while, or they all new?
Mary Kay?
Good morning, Mr. O'Toole. Marika Walsh with the Globe and Mail. I'm wondering if you think it's appropriate that Andrew Scheer has hired his sister-in-law to work in his constituency office while his sister-in-law hires his wife to work in her company.
I learned of the situation last night, and I understand that rules were followed and there was disclosure and transparency of it. But I'll be speaking to Mr. Scheer later today about the situation.
What are you going to be speaking with him about? And are you, I understand you're saying rules are followed, but are you okay? Does that meet your level and your bar of ethics?
I have a very high bar of ethics, and I expect my team to live up to and exceed the expectations Canadians place upon us. The Trudeau government, Mr. Trudeau himself, is the subject of 3 personal ethical. I'm asking you about your own party's ethics. I'm telling you why. I am telling you why I have such high expectations. Canadians are disappointed with the Trudeau government. So I will be telling my caucus that I have high expectations on their conduct, on the transparency under which we will operate. I've said frequently, we are a government in waiting, and Canada needs a return to peace, order, and good ethical government. That's why I'll be speaking to Mr.
Andrew Scheer meet that bar?
He has met the rules and has been transparent in accordance with the rules, but I'll be talking about my expectations which exceed that, because I think after the resignation of Bill Morneau, who had 2 ethical investigations himself, 3 for the Prime Minister, several other front bench members, Canadians want and deserve better, and I'm going to expect that from my team.
This concludes the press conference. Ici me fait la conférence de presse. Merci.
Thank you.